The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, is but the latest step in a series of broad transatlantic negotiations which have sought to promote the important bilateral relationship between the United States and the European Union.
As has already been mentioned, the US-EU relationship is the largest in the world. It makes up nearly half of global GDP. We trade about $1 trillion in goods and services each year. We invest nearly $4 trillion in each other's economies. And all that supports around 13 million jobs on both sides of the Atlantic.
Considering the numbers involved, a successful trade and investment deal between the US and the EU would have major implications not only for the two domestic markets involved, but also for the global trade system as a whole. With this in mind, on June 14, 2013, the Council of the European Union adopted negotiating directives for a transatlantic trade and investment partnership with the US.
The shared goal for the United States and the European Union is to negotiate a broad and comprehensive trade and investment agreement that will promote jobs, economic growth, and international competitiveness in both of our economies.
If the stated goals are clear, questions remain whether this most recent joint effort by Washington and Brussels is a defensive move or a constructive engagement in view of emerging powers and changing international dynamics. The Institut d'études européennes of the Université Libre de Bruxelles hosted a Green Agora forum gathering over 80 researchers, experts and decision-makers to discuss whether TTIP is to be a source of strengthened global growth or merely a sideshow to other more determining factors.
Certainly one should look to new developing powers as well, but there's no reason to turn your back on an old friend.
The time is slowly running out for the transatlantic relationship to still be the leader in global governance.
Transatlantic relationship may be in kind of a danger, and we're not sure where it's moving, but there is still hope for transatlantic relationship, and there is still hope for it as a stabilizing factor. And many other countries are looking towards the US and the EU, sometimes as role models.
No doubt transatlantic relationship remains a key pillar for global stability and also for ensuring new forms of global governance. The problem is this relationship needs to be substantially reviewed and revitalized in view of the emerging challenges. And the key challenges to deal with is certainly the emergence of new powers.
If the Euro-Atlantic relationship still has the means to shape the global system, it must adapt and take into account the emergence of new powers. Whether or not the recently launched TTIP negotiations are able to meet this challenge will determine the future relative importance of the EU-US relationship in the global system.
Could this transatlantic partnership for a transatlantic marketplace be helpful for restoring a new momentum in as growth and jobs are concerned, as global governance in trade and investment is concerned? It depends whether we understand this dialogue is defensive, as exclusive, or whether we understand this dialogue as inclusive, as open to others.
I think the jury is still out because neither side has really revealed what the game was about. It may be a game about cooperation, it may be a game about competition, it may be a game about China containment, it may be a game about putting together a system which will be open to others. So far, the jury is still out, but it has a potential of anchoring the governance of globalization in a set of values and standards, provided it is open to newcomers and to emerging countries. It has this potential. Now, whether this potential will accrue or not, I don't know. It's a human endeavor.
The devil is in the detail, but the devil is also in the process. So, for example, I could see the TTIP becoming a real problem if we get a harmonization of standards between the EU and the US, which would be a great thing. It would help in efficiency between trade between these two giants. But there would be a real problem if we get a harmonization of standards and the rising powers such as Brazil, India, and China are also expected to conform to these standards.
The rise of new powers has transformed the global environment and changed the relative power position of the EU and the US. In such a fluid environment, policymakers in Washington and Brussels must decide whether to envision the TTIP space as a stepping stone or a fortress. Furthermore, the choices facing the EU and the US are of global significance, considering international cooperation has become ever more fragmented and at times lacking in leadership.
There's no longer a hegemon or a co-leadership provided by the United States and by the European Union.
We have to think about this partnership not as a security community as it was, not as common values, but as only one part of a more global cooperation, which unfortunately is not really accomplished and achieved.
This global systems fragmentation also affects the global trade system, as reflected in the World Trade Organization, which has seen its multilateral efforts frozen for the last 2 decades. Bilateral agreements such as TTIP are both a product and a response to the said stalemate.
I much prefer multilateralism. It's very difficult now because of the fragmentation of interests. It's not just US, Europe.
The WTO is in a stalemate, and all the analyses show that the so-called proliferation of bilateral agreements is a factor of this stalemate.
It is important to have deliberation because we have an incoherent system. If you let the markets play, the financial market, the trade market, the investment direct, then you might end in chaotic state. Therefore, when two big continents meet and try to discuss and anticipate mutually beneficial agreements, I think it is a good thing. But we should be modest in recognizing that we should be the catalyst of the mode. We cannot be the driver.
However, beyond its global implications, TTIP is first and foremost a partnership for greater growth, employment and competitiveness. How this is to be achieved and what impact it will have on the European internal market are both further important questions.
In that sense, it might be very much aimed at reinforcing growth, reinforcing economic development, offering more jobs.
Making sure that we don't duplicate processes and procedures. It's about not excluding sort of goods or imposing views on others, but really trying to find a way to sort of avoid duplication. And I think that's actually a benefit for both consumers in Europe and in the United States.
There is a high level of uncertainty because this agreement will be so important. It will have systemic importance for the entire trade regime complex. And it's important to learn how to manage uncertainty.
What we're hearing is, there are 3 areas, and the one that everyone is putting in the middle as being the core area of importance is the regulatory coherence area. It's also the most difficult. It's the thing that in various ways the 2 parties have been trying to do over the last 10, 15, probably 20 years with only limited success. In a way, it is the most difficult thing. It's going to take a lot of time. 2 different systems of regulation are going to have to adapt to each other in one way or another. It's just not going to be very easy.
By adapting to each other, both domestic markets will change and consumers will be directly confronted with the consequences, be they positive or negative. The European Common Market will have to adjust, which in turn will have different consequences for its various members.
It might affect the countries differently, but I think the negotiation could also be a good pretext to discuss internally inside Europe, under the European states, how to negotiate with the US.
It will have implications for the single market, for sure. And we need to involve all member states and to assess the implications of the outcomes of these negotiations to make sure that this will be a win-win game for all member states.
I think there is no question that this agreement can result in any low level of protection. This is a starting point of the high-level working group report, is also part of the EU negotiating mandate, and also this will not be allowed by the regulators who are going to be closely involved, nor by the legislative authorities, which ultimately are going to have to seal this agreement. We are going to be very careful in entering into any arrangement that could imply jeopardizing the impressive achievements of the internal market.
From the internal market to the global cooperation system, whether or not TTIP will be a defensive move or a constructive engagement remains an open question. One can, however, already state that a key risk which needs to be avoided is conveying the wrong message to other players.
If our message is that we are on a kind of defensive Western community against the other will react. And not in a kind of a shy way like Brazil saying, okay, I will come to the negotiation. They could also react in a negative way, saying, you are organizing your bloc, we will organize our bloc. A kind of domino effect in a negative terms. That is possible.
An opportunity for enhanced global cooperation is to be seized.
It's a very much a fallback second best, if anything. So I would hope we would have the capacity to generate some multilateralism, even if it's mini multilateralism, even if it's US, Europe, not necessarily global.
And the EU should not be insecure about its negotiation capacities.
The United States are no longer dominant and hegemonic power as they were after World War II. And they are not in condition to impose to the others, and particularly to the European Union, rules, procedures, settlements convenient for the United States in a hierarchical way, because we are negotiating on an even level. I think that we have to be much more confident in the strength of the European Union.
Far from unilateral decisions or predetermined outcomes, the results of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership negotiations will be decided by the choices of elected officials on either side of the Atlantic. Real stakes are being negotiated and are still open-ended. All European and American consumers have a lot riding on it, as the implementation of any TTIP agreement will directly impact their daily lives. The obvious importance of these negotiations explains the growing interest among researchers and experts. However, worryingly, much remains to be done to cultivate greater interest among wider audiences. If the expert communities involved are to continue providing insights, media and elected representatives are called upon to ensure greater oversight.